ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mitch Bell. I'm your host with Tall Tales with Taco. Welcome wherever you may be around this great world and whatever you're doing after our great holiday season of Thanksgiving. Certainly do appreciate you joining us tonight. As a Marine, we always talk about we never leave our dead behind. We never leave a man behind. And if it is humanly possible, we will send teams out to go rescue and bring our guys back. It doesn't matter if they have been, wounded for a week and passed. We try to retrieve the bodies so that we can bring them home to their families. Nothing worse than a family having to bury an empty casket without any part of their loved one recovered. In that being said, there are many situations in battles from World War I all the way through World War II to present day where, frankly, it just wasn't possible to retrieve our dead due to the number of enemy that were out there. We possibly could kill more of our folks just trying to do that. And they've done that in the past. Guys have gone on rescue missions that have ended up losing so many more friendly casualties that we didn't anticipate. But it's kind of reassuring to know that your body will be recovered, and brought home. In that case, we also have a lot of NGOs, non-government organizations that volunteer to go do that. And tonight we're talking to Mark Noah, who is the founder of History Flight. It is just a fascinating deal to me because as a historian, history major, historian, love of history, as a Marine, what he's doing is phenomenal. And oh, by the way, he's an honorary Marine. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Mark Noah on the show. Mark, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time coming out and joining us today. When you and I met years ago was about 2018. It is just, it's beyond belief what you've accomplished. And I'm so proud of you, especially as a Marine, what you're doing for all those Marines that died in battle and bringing their remains home, and the airmen over in Europe as well. So first of all, thank you, sir. Big
Thank you.
Hat tip. I owe you a cold beer when we get together.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. It's a humble honor to work on the project and to be part of it. And it's a great team of people that we've put together that have helped us achieve our goals. So I always say that I'm nothing special or anything like that. It's really the group of people that have put together the success that we've created.
It is. It's the group, but it's also leadership from the top. So what you all are doing and your leadership team obviously has the right combination to motivate folks to volunteer to come out and help. So take me back. How did you get involved in this? What sparked the desire to go to these obscure places to dig into the battlefields and return the remains?
Well, it's a good question. Probably I didn't fully understand, my personal knowledge about it until I, went through the journey that created so many people recovered to America and everything like that. But suffice it to say, about 20 years ago, I was restoring old airplanes, and I was very interested in the historic preservation element of World War II history, and I was invited to be a structures expert on a recovery project. And in doing so, I came to realize that the people that flew the airplanes and the other service personnel who perished in other types of activities non-aviation related were far more important than the airplanes and the equipment that they operated. So we decided, we used to operate a fleet of World War II airplanes, giving historic preservation rides to the general public, but we decided to shift the focus of what we were doing from historic preservation to the recovery of the missing.
And wait a minute, that's right. You all were given rides in Stearmans and whatnot, right?
Yeah, we gave rides in T6 Texans, Stearmans, and we owned a B-25 also.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a tremendous amount of fun. And the airplanes were wonderful. But at the same time, like I mentioned, the people were more important than the equipment. And that became very, very clear in that first project that I was invited to go on. The son of one of the missing air crew was on the mission and he got to dive on his father's airplane, and he had never been out of Texas. And so when he went overseas and dove on his father's airplane, he showed us letters that had been in his footlocker that were shipped home. And in one of the letters was a letter from his wife to his father, and it said, "Here's my wedding ring. Wear it around your neck with your dog tags, and it'll give you good luck, and it'll bring you home." And when the Department of Defense recovered his father, they recovered his dog tags and that ring.
Was he still located inside the aircraft?
Yes, in the debris field of the aircraft. And so, that really drove home the fact that the human element of conflicts of the 20th century had not yet been closed. And I was a history major in college, but I did not know that 19% of World War II's casualties were still missing. So 78,000 people. And then when you really look into it, then you had an additional 8,000 missing from the Korean War, a little over 2,000 missing from Vietnam. And the number is a staggering number. That's well over 85,000 people that are still missing. So we decided to kind of do our best to use skills that we learned in the private sector to try to take a smart business approach into doing as many recoveries as we could with the funding that we could raise.
So you, over the years, have 120 deployments, if I'm reading your website.
Yep.
With 160 recovered that are identified, and you have another 385 that have been recovered awaiting ID. Isn't there a government department that's supposed to be doing this for us? Is there?
Well, the scope of the problem is so huge that that the government department that works on this is called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. They need partners that are able and willing to add on to the mission to enhance the number of people that can be recovered. And many of the people that we've recovered have had living brothers and sisters and living children at their funerals. And of course, since the amount of time that has passed is so great, it's a sense of urgency. So the more activity, the more resources that can be brought to bear in the mission, the better it is.
So what was your first mission?
Well, the first one that we ever did was we initially did a ton of research. The project started out while we were flying airplanes, doing a tremendous amount of research at the National Archives, and during what I call kind of my naivete phase of the project. And we did a tremendous amount of research on specific individuals that were lost and where we might possibly find them. And while we were working on that, we did air losses all throughout the Pacific and Europe. And then we found a burial report in the National Archives that said it was a recovery report from after the war for Tarawa. And it said I think the conclusion sentence was the end result of the entire operation was that only 49% of the known buried on the island were recovered.
49%.
Yeah. And so
wow.
when I read that, I about fell out of my chair, because I knew that the total casualties, U.S. casualties for Tarawa, were well in excess of 1,000. So the number was kind of like unbelievable. But when we started to really dig into it, it became very believable. And some people would say that these people were truly missing. They floated off into the ocean and stuff like that. And clearly there were a lot of casualties like that. But we went to the Navy's Bureau of Medicine and Surgery and looked up the death certificates for all the Marines and corpsmen that perished in the Battle of Tarawa. And then we went to the History Division at Quantico and looked up the casualty cards for all the Marines in all of World War II. And by putting all those different names and injuries together, we were able to come up with some very clear data that there were a very large number of people that were buried on the island and were never recovered. And we started to kind of open up the onion, so to speak, and start peeling back the different layers to get there. And it was very clear after a short period of time that one of the first things that happened was the Marines buried their own on the island after a incredibly difficult 76-hour struggle. And they buried their own people. They took good records of it, and then they left. And when they left, the Army Aviation Construction Occupation Organization came in and started rebuilding the island and occupied the island. And the Seabees came in and started building a modern air base. And in doing so, they took down the markers of a lot of the original graves and put up new modern looking cemeteries in the proximity of where the burials were, but not exactly on top of them. And so when, after the war, when they came back to do the recovery work, the report was written that I read in the beginning of our Tarawa project that said we only found 49% of the known buried. And the reason that is because they covered up a lot of the original graves with infrastructure.
Really? So there's now towns over top of some of these sites?
There were the CBs built a huge air base on top of that battlefield, and they built it on top of the existing infrastructure and on top of the Marine graves and the Japanese graves.
Wow.
It's a sight to see. I don't have all of the photographs from all that stuff. I mean, I could send you one of our reports, and you could take individual photographs and perhaps put them on a later segment when you're doing a reportage of it. But it's fascinating. You can see the different layers of time changing. You know, for example, we have photographs from January of 1944, a month and a half after the battle, where you can see the scars in the earth where the burials were made. And then we have photographs from March of 1944, where you can see the infrastructure that was built on top of them.
Wow. Well,
And
you do have a couple photos that they're hauntingly incredible. This photo right here, the 3 Marines. Now, did they have is that a poncho that is over top of the remains and they were just buried?
Yes. The way the Marines did the burials is the chaplains of each regiment would try to collect as many of the Marines that they knew from their regiment if it was possible. Mm-hmm. And they dug about 1 meter deep cuts in the earth with bulldozers and laid the Marines down like that, and then covered them with ponchos.
Wow. So the remains are actually pretty well preserved. Are you able to then, once you recover the bodies, do they have the dog tags?
I interviewed a wonderful Marine named Norm Hatch, who was one of the combat photographers on Tarawa, who shot the famous movie with the Marines on Tarawa and won an Academy Award for that. And I was lucky enough to be his friend in his later years and interview him. And he said, to me, he said, you have to understand that on Tarawa, the only thing that was normal was everything was abnormal. So when you look at it with that very kind of wise statement in the context of the burials, everything was different. For example, the 3 Marines you just saw in those pictures had all of their equipment on. They had their belts on, their ammunition on them. They had hand grenades in their belts and everything like that. In other cases, for example, we recovered Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman, who was a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, and he had all of his stuff taken off, which including his ID tags. So he had no ID tags, but he was identified using his dental work, and we found a Zippo lighter in one of his pockets with a B for Bonnyman on it.
Wow.
But the The lighter, of course, would be circumstantial evidence that couldn't be used for the identification, but the teeth were very, very definitive. And so, but in a lot of these cases, the individuals would have ID tags. Some of them would have one because that someone had taken the second one for record keeping. Some of them would have both of them taken. It was all different. And interestingly enough, the dog tags themselves were all different. Many of them were homemade by Marines who wanted an ID tag but weren't issued one, or perhaps they'd lost one. Mm-hmm. Many of them were made out of the old school Monel 3-part alloy, mm-hmm. and many of them were made out of the more modern stainless steel.
And so, what survived? What sort of metal survived this? Dog tag wise, what would you find?
The stainless steel ones survived the best, and many of them when you recorded their position in situ in the ground, you could photograph them and record them in a mapping program. Then you could take them out and wipe them off, and they'd be perfectly legible. The ones that were made out of Monel, which was a type of alloy that was used for boat propellers back in World War II era, was a 3-part alloy. And there became a sense of intergranular corrosion that from the different metals, creating a type of corrosion between them electrolytically. And those ones would be the most challenging.
They use, I don't think I have a set of dog tags. Do I? Yeah. Got the old, it's just a blank one. But they used to put the little notch on the other side. And they always said that was to put in between the teeth. Did you ever find anyone identified like that?
I've heard that story, and those rectangular ID tags that you just showed with the notch on it, that's an Army ID tag. The Marine Corps ones were different.
They were round.
Right. Yeah, and or like oval. And I can send you some photographs of them. Exemplars while we're talking, but excuse me, I'll send you one right now.
Okay. Well, this also is an impressive photograph of you down in a recovery pit.
Yes.
Do you remember who this was?
That's Albert Strange is the name of that Marine who we recovered, and he's featured in Robert Sherrod's book, The Battle of Tarawa.
Tell me about him.
Hold on a second. I'll shoot you a photograph. In Robert Sherrod's book, History of a Battle, excuse me, Tarawa, History of a Battle, he talks about Albert Strange and said he was the fightingest Marine he ever saw. Mm-hmm. And so we recovered Albert Strange, and we did not know who he was. But when we recovered his entire remains, just below where his neck was, we found his ID tags in the sand. And so that was an interesting find, and we were very pleased to make that. He was a very historic combat Marine from the Battle of Tarawa, so it was an honor to be part of that.
Do you ever get a spiritual connection with a guy when you're recovering? Have you had an not out of body experience, more like a dream at night where a guy comes to talk to you? Have you ever had that connection with any of the folks that you've recovered?
No, I have not, but I'm convinced that this is a spiritual process. And one of the terms that I used to describe it a while ago is for the souls of the missing and the families they left behind, and certainly this part of the process is about finding individuals and returning them home for a Christian burial where they can achieve the kind of lasting peace that they would have wanted when they shipped out and volunteered in the first place.
Right. So with 385, is it not DARPA? The units, are they
DPAA.
DPAA, are they over in Hawaii now and they're just slowly matching records with the remains?
They have an office in Washington D.C., and then they have an office in Hawaii and a really big state of the art forensic lab, probably the largest one in the world. They also have a forensic lab in Offutt, Nebraska, I believe.
Huh.
And the way they coin the term to describe a recovered sense of or part of human remains is a minimum number of individuals. So when it talks about a minimum number of individuals that we've recovered that are not yet identified, there's a that is a full range of individuals. For example, you'll be talking to Will in a moment, and he worked on a recovery project where we recovered a crew, or the front crew of a B-17 bomber that crashed, where the pilot ordered the bailout of the airplane, but he remained on board flying, and the bombardier and the navigator remained on board to shoot up a severely injured crewman and parachute him out. And before they could get out themselves, the plane crashed. And so the minimum number of individuals that were recovered at that site were 3. And in the context of an airplane crash, it's amazing how cruel the deceleration forces are on the structure of a human body. And so an anthropologist will look at the remains and say, there are 3 types of this type of bone fragment. And so that constitutes 3 different individuals. And so that's where the number of unidentified but recovered individuals that are on our website is listed that way, because we've recovered one minimum number of individuals, which could be a complete skeleton like Albert Strange, but also, individuals that are shattered from a plane crash, or in the context of a lot of the Tarawa burials after the war, when they came back to do the recovery work, they recovered parts of some of the cemeteries, and they left behind tremendous amounts of additional parts of people. For example, in one place we found about 14 or 15 pairs of boots with the feet still in them, and the long bones of the bodies had been removed and they left the feet behind. So each pair of feet in a boot would be one individual.
Right. Well, you also think about the devastation from the aviation and crashes, but the artillery. There are sections in France, I know, where an entire British unit was totally wiped out by artillery. I mean, they didn't have one body to recover. It just atomized and the pieces just disintegrated. So that kind of goes back to when Will comes on, the experience that he had recovering those bodies. I found fascinating. But
it really is. In Will's project, it's I was not fortunate enough to be there because I was back in the States working at that time. But the project he worked on, they found 3 individuals in a great state of deceleration trauma, but they found an intact pocket Bible in the flight suit of one of the individuals.
Oh wow!
And it's readable.
Wow. That's amazing.
I'll find that picture while you're talking with Will and send it to you, and you can put it up there.
So now, having experienced both Europe and the Far East, which, in terms of difficulty for weather and for insects and stuff like that, would you find the Far East to be a more difficult recovery effort, or Europe?
Yes. Yeah, working in the Far East in the Pacific is much more difficult because of the remoteness of the locations and getting supplies and logistical materials out to recovery sites, as well as the infrastructure to support something. In Europe, if somebody got hurt on the site, you have a state-of-the-art hospital very close by, and we usually have military experienced and trained medic on each of our teams in case something is so urgent that person has to be there to save someone's life. But in the case of the Pacific, getting someone to the state-of-the-art hospital is a much more challenging kind of
Oh, I bet.
endeavor, as well as just the distances involved and the access to quality materials that you need to support the mission.
Well, I saw you have 9 archaeologists on staff. At any given time, how many projects do you have? Yeah, how many projects do you have going on?
Well, that's a great question, because at some points in time when we've had more resources, we've had 30 archaeologists on staff.
Oh,
and
wow.
we've run it. Before the coronavirus, we had an active office in Europe, an office in the Philippines, an office in the United States, and an office in Tarawa. And we found that by putting an office in a specific location with a high number of people that are missing, you can, by running a 12-month-a-year program, you can pick up so much additional information and intel on where leads are that lead to recovering people, that it's actually cheaper than going out there once a year or twice a year with a field team that's kind of beginning up at the beginning each time.
Sure.
And so
Reinventing the wheel, right?
exactly. And so there's been points in time where when we've had more resources, we've had over 30 archaeologists working 3 or 4 sites concurrently. And right now, we're just working the Tarawa project, as you know, because we were effectively, like the rest of the world, shut down because of the coronavirus.
Mhm.
And now that we're bouncing back, we have that. If we add on additional projects, we'll add on additional staff to support them.
And so volunteers, what does it take to volunteer for your organization?
It just takes a good, solid person who really has a commitment and a love for the mission at hand. And so we do screen people because, of course, sometimes you wouldn't want somebody who is not that squared away out on your projects, and we
Mhm.
train them as well. To look for specific items when they're working through the taking dirt and sifting it through quarter-inch screen is a very laborious task. And
Mhm.
so we'll take several hundred square meters of earth, cubic meters of earth, and pass it through quarter-inch screens in order to find every single thing you can in the recovery scene. And
Mhm.
that's what Will and his sons worked on. And basically, it's remarkable how much you can find using that kind of technique. So we've had quite a few outstanding people come and volunteer with us, and we also have had quite a few outstanding, paid employees. But we've also had PhD level archaeologists volunteer to work on the project just out of love for the mission,
That's great.
and because this is clearly a lot more interesting than a lot of the more conventional archaeology that happens in America.
Yeah, yeah. When I lived in Japan, and I think I might have told you this years ago, but '94, we used to go look for dead Japanese down in Okinawa.
Oh yeah.
And oh yeah, so we had a book, and we would go down this. I had this one guy that was really good at it, and we'd find the indention in the ground. We would dig through and enter into a cave, and from there we'd find the Japanese remains. We'd go back and mark it on the map to show the authorities, and then we gave it to the Japanese liaison down in Naha, and they would
Hmm.
go out there to go recover the remains. But they had told me, the Japanese had told us that they would allow a period for them to grow their fingernails and their hair. The commanders, like 3 months, you could grow your fingernails long, your hair long, get a beard, and then they would shave it all off and they'd mail it home to their parents, so that if they got that letter saying that your son Araki was killed in Tarawa, Japanese wise, they could take that packet of human belongings from their son and bury that, and that was
Wow.
officially their son, which I thought was a very interesting idea.
It
Um,
is.
just to have something of their kin.
Well, culturally, every culture handles death differently, and of course, in war, then it's the ability to abide by cultural norms, or you know, probably vastly curtailed in all settings. And so
Mhm.
that's fascinating to hear that. There's an excellent movie that was made right after World War II called The Harp of Burma that you might check out as a person who participated in the Japanese burial process. But it's about a Japanese soldier who uh, goes back into the jungle in Burma after the war is over to try and convince his comrades to surrender. And in doing so, he finds just thousands of deceased dead Japanese and creates a funeral pyre for them. And at the end of the movie, he effectively, in a Buddhist kind of tradition, transcends the wheel of life. I mean, it's really fascinating.
Well, I have to look that up. The Heart of Burma.
Yep, the harp of Burma.
Oh, harp. Okay.
And sometimes sometimes the movie will be listed as the Burmese harp. But yeah, that's very interesting. I'd never heard of the concept of sending the hair home before those conflicts.
Yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, and you do think about it. The kid leaves at 18 years old, and he's off on some godforsaken island somewhere. There was a couple years there where they were doing nothing but preparing the islands for invasion,
Right.
so they had plenty of time to do that stuff. Yeah, yeah. What about locals? How about locals? Do they happen to be digging a latrine, or they dig something they find, and they come in and turn in to you?
Oh,
Hey, we
absolutely.
found
And
stuff over.
that's an excellent question. We employ about 20 local laborers on the island, and we pay them substantially above the local wages that they can get. And so we have a really good group of local men that work on the project. And the way we met some of them in the first place was we ran ads in the local newspaper and also on the local radio. And
Mhm.
the island of Tarawa today is covered with about 25 to 30,000 people who live on a 285-acre island. And
Wow.
so it's an incredibly dense population. There's probably less than 30 working toilets on the island. And people live in a state of great poverty on top of this battlefield. And so very often they accidentally interact with the burials on the island, and that's how we developed some of the first intel to help us find some of the
Uh-huh.
marine graves on Tarawa.
So now, where do you guys stay when you go out to Tarawa?
There are several Western style hotels that are very decent, have clean water and food, and we learned about them by staying at the ones that did not have clean water and food, learning the lesson the hard way. And but yes, there are some excellent hotels that are Spartan but very squared away in terms of what Westerners need to stay healthy while working.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I was gonna say tent with some mosquito netting, right?
Yeah, that's not good enough in this setting.
Well, listen, I've had you on for 30 minutes. I'd like to bring Will on, and he can
Sure.
talk about some stuff as well. Folks, I want you to meet Will Wright. His call sign is Wilbur. He's another aviator. All three of us are airline guys, so I know that does help in terms of being able to take the time off to get a block of time to go somewhere to do one of these projects, which, um, God, I wish I had all the time in the world to go do this. So, Will, talk about how you got involved. Did you two fly together, and then you just got sucked into the great journey?
Yeah, actually, I met Mark. We're both UPS pilots. Mark, much senior than I am, but I was on a jump seat to Hawaii, and I was heading out to have fun and see my family, whereas Mark was doing something much more important, which was he was returning uh, some of these dog tags that he was telling you about and showing you to DPAA. I think it might have been the first set of a large batch of dog tags, and really just did an amazing story. You can tell he's a complete amazing storyteller, and he basically told the story of what they're doing out there in Tarawa with History Flight. I thought it was just such an amazing story. It was really neat to see and hear what he was doing, and completely intrigued by it all. I came back, told my wife about it, that if I ever had the opportunity, I'd love to go out there and help them out. And you know, Mark that wasn't looking for volunteers. He was just doing something in his own time, and it was just a really neat thing to hear what he was doing. And probably it wasn't until 2019 when Mark had mentioned, I think they had just opened up Europe and said, "Hey, look, we've got a lot of Europe recoveries going. If any of you all, and this is UPS pilots, he was talking to, if any of you all are interested in helping out, we've got quite a few sites that we're looking at getting to, and the more people they had, the quicker they could move on to the next site, and so." It was an opportunity for any of us to jump in and help out. So I, of course, took that opportunity right away. I was so excited about it, and most excitedly about it because I knew I could bring my kids along, assuming Mark and his team was okay with that.
So you brought your boys. Talk about, I've got a picture of Will and James here working. And so here they are at a site.
Yeah, that's the twins. That's James and Jack. When I talked to Mark, I gave him dates that the kids would be available. They're really big into sports. Went to college on sports. James did, and so timing was an issue. And thankfully, Mark and the team were very, very happy to. Hey, look, you tell us when you think you might be able to do it. We'll tell you where to go to meet up with us. And so. This here is a small town south, about an hour south of Berlin in Horst. And it's what Mark was talking about, where it was a B-17 that went in with 3 crew members on board. And, we kind of showed up and helped out as much as we could. But really, it was an opportunity for my kids to see just, how important it is what Mark and his crew are doing there. You can see that is one of the amazing propeller. That thing's actually almost perfectly straight. You can see a couple of nicks there, but that was pulled out of the ground the day before we got there, and they were going to be putting that up. I believe and Mark, you could probably fix me on this one, but one of the local establishments was going to be taking that propeller for the B-17. There was a lady in the town, you can see in the background there, that saw the B-17 fly over the city during World War II, and just tells the story about how this thing was almost inverted, flying over the city very low. And the thought was that the B-17 was trying to right itself at the end, the pilot, and during that righting, obviously lost lift on the aircraft and unfortunately went in to the ground there and just south of the city.
And so how long did you guys, were you able to stay out there?
We had about a week, and that's the great thing about Mark and his team is that they're happy to take you for as much as you want. And I mean, obviously, they would love to have a lot of help. Their teams are pretty amazing. I mean, they're run by ex-military generally, not always. They have obviously the archaeologists, they have forensic scientists there, and they are a tightly knit group that just run very, very well. And they're also really good about teaching a 16-year-old how to sift through the ground. So they're good at teaching, but most importantly, they're good at doing their job. There are a lot of regulations that we found that were important that we had to make sure we upheld because when they eventually come to inspect the site, they want to make sure that everything was done appropriately and correctly, getting these young crew members out of the ground.
And what do they check out at that point?
They're checking. There's obviously, and Mark is most obviously quite a bit more than this. Obviously, they're checking to make sure that the crew members were taken out appropriately. What's remaining is safe. In this case, the B-17, we had 4 engines stuck into the ground, and you could actually see the remains of the engine, which most of them were pulled out, but you could see the oil that had sifted out, and that's the big deal. It's an environmental impact of these sites. And Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong with this. You have to be very careful pulling these things out because you could be disturbing the water table and whatever else. And then of course you got bullets and you got bombs and all those things. There were no bombs on board this one, but there were definitely bullets. They had to make sure they're very careful with as well.
And Mark, do you guys have, I saw EOD, so you probably have a couple of EOD guys that come out to the site?
Yeah, typically each team is led by a civilian forensic archaeologist and then supported by a military team leader who we usually have as a UXO person or a medic. And that way you have those different skills all together. And if they do run into something exciting like an unexploded bomb or something like that, they can handle it appropriately.
Or the hand grenades
Yeah,
on their
hand
vest?
grenades are the most common thing that we found in Tarawa. The most dangerous thing we ever found was a white phosphorus hand grenade. And fortunately, we were working with the vice president of our organization at the time was a Marine who used those when they were new in Vietnam. And he said, I know all this stuff because they gave us all of the old World War II junk to serve with in Vietnam. So
No way.
he grabbed this white phosphorus hand grenade and took off running for the ocean. He didn't even say like, "Hey guys, I gotta go." He just grabbed it and took off running because I think his worry was that if the side of the canister was corroded and some air hit the white
Exposed to air,
phosphorus,
right?
the whole neighborhood we were working in would have gone up in smoke. So that was the most dangerous thing we ever ran into. But we always had a person there to handle it if they did run into it.
Wow, that's amazing. Any other explosions or any close calls?
We've never really had any close calls because we've always been super, super careful. And one of the things that we all share as aviators is this exposure to risk over a long period of time, and that teaches you to be as fastidious and as careful as you possibly can all the time. And so when I started this project, I hired a really good expert level PhD archaeologist who was in his 70s to kind of help me manage it. And I said to him, where is the standards? Where is the standard book, where you go to for everything? And he just started laughing and he goes, well, you don't know anything, do you? And I said, well, apparently not. That's why I'm asking that question. And he said, there are no standards. And he said, in archaeology, it's kind of like people will say, well, I learned this at University of Chicago and I learned this at, Oxford, and it's all different. So
Right.
What I try to do is I tasked him with helping me set up a set of basic standards that were really easy to take that template and put it anywhere. And in doing so, we were able to trap, that danger with the white phosphorus hand grenade. But we've never really had any other major issues when we've been working.
So you guys are actually the bearer standards. You're starting to make your SOP, or in the Marine Corps we call it FMFM manual, fleet manual. Are you guys developing some sort of military archaeology manual?
Well, no, we're not trying to do anything, like as if to say, here's how you do it, because that's the experience that I've experienced with so many different schools of thought in archaeology. People all say, well, the way I do it is the way to do it. And
Right.
you don't get standardized behavior that way. So we developed standardized behavior for us, and then we dovetailed it into what the standardized behavior was for the DoD.
Wow.
And try to just kind of make it so it would be flying a tight formation and you'd be able to take the work that we do and have it translate into success when it gets to the lab where the forensic anthropologist will be identifying the individuals we recovered.
That's amazing. And Wilbur, when you guys were working the shifters, how big of a remain would you find? Could you find a piece of a jawbone, a skull? What did you guys find?
Well, in our case, I would say probably 99.9% of the stuff we found was either dirt or aircraft parts. So, you're really amazingly, you're sifting an entire aircraft, in our situation, an aircraft through these little sifters. And so there are millions upon millions of pieces of that aircraft as you go through. And every single one of those are inspected. They sit down, you sift through it, you find the parts, you put them in a some sort of bucket or a place to contain it, and then that's resifted through and looked at again. We did find during our time a lot of these of the dog tags and a lot of that stuff that had been found the day before we had gotten there, actually 2 days before he'd gotten there. So we did find a couple of fragments of bone, and those were all taken care of. And then, you know, it's really transparent to those of us that are volunteering and to what they do with them afterwards. And Mark obviously knows. You're just there really for grunt work to hopefully find that piece to hand it to them, and then obviously have that find its way to DPAA.
Well, how big of an area would, as the B-17 impacted in this one particular instance, how big of an area of debris field, how much of it was taken by the locals, cleared off? Oh, this is in my way, I need to plow my field, and they hauled all this stuff off. So was there a lot of stuff? How deep would it be? I'm just curious.
Yeah, there really, and Mark could probably, if he remembers too, in this instance, the tail was sticking out of the ground. And that tail was taken off and moved out of the way and put somewhere back in the 40s. And then the farmer's field was, you know, ground up. They put dirt over the top of it, ground up, and then they'd been growing crops over it for years. So a lot of that stuff, that first probably 12 inches of topsoil that had been ground, had a lot of metal mixed up within it. And it wasn't until you got below that level that you got to the clean dirt, and then of course the direct piece of the aircraft and you know, mixed in with that just very small portion of dirt there. So most of it was gone. And then in this instance, Mark, when we were done, we were there till they tightened it up and cleaned it for its last inspection. When they were going to be done with that, they were going to fill it back in and give it back to the farmer whose field it was for him to continue on. And Mark, you probably know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I just sent you several photos of it, Mitch. There's a photo that we took with a drone of the recovery site itself, and you can see how it was gridded out, and you can see the areas of cultural interest in the photograph, where you can actually see 3 of the engines protruding from the ground. And it gives you a good idea of what Will was saying, is that the first 12 inches of the ground are what is the plow zone. That's what had been plowed since the war, growing crops. And below that once was where you got into the cultural layer where the wreck itself was. And if you look at another of the photographs that I sent you, it's the pocket Bible that was found in the navigator's flight suit. And it shows you the level of preservation that you have in European type of archaeology, as opposed to what you find in the Pacific, where no paper would ever survive. Right. But then you can also see the third photograph that I sent was
well, you sent them to my cell phone, so I have to transfer those to email and then email them to the computer. It's okay. Keep talking. I'll pull those up.
But the third photo was a magnetometer scan of the field before we started digging, and it was how we used the remote sensing to place the grid on top of the site to accurately start digging right on top of the site. And we've been very successful in being able to pinpoint cultural areas where a loss incident has occurred with remote sensing. So within the first 4 or 5 hours of the first day, we had found parts of this aircraft. And it's an excellent question to say, you know, what happened to the aircraft itself? And all of the crashes are different. In this case, the plane hit the ground at a low speed while it was trying to roll right side up, and the wingtip hit the ground and the plane cartwheeled into the ground. So it didn't go that far into the ground. Other aircraft that we've recovered, we found remains of the single seat fighter aircraft pilot 15, 16, 17 feet below the surface.
What?
And you know, where the engine would travel that far down. In this case, the remains of the flight crew were found at about 1 meter below the surface. So each case is different. We worked on a case in Buschhoven, Germany, where the pilot was a member of Hub Zemke's Wolf Pack, a legendary American fighter squadron group. And he and an Me-109 had a dogfight, and they shot each other down. Both planes crashed. And and our pilot, Lieutenant Carlson, was pulling out of a high speed dive, and he hit the ground at probably a 10-degree angle. And so his plane disintegrated, and the remains of himself and the airplane were distributed over an area about the size of a football field. And
Wow.
it took us months of back-breaking labor to sift all that ground to find the remains of the pilot. But in the case of this B-17, you can see the site, the recovery site, is about the size of the wingspan of the aircraft, and you can
Oh, and
clearly
so am I
see.
looking at the engines, the 4 engines right there in a
Yes, you
row?
are. And you are looking at the 4 engines, and the space in between the 4 engines is where the cockpit was.
Wow. Okay.
And you can see, we really tried to improve the work that we did with every site. And this site was handled very beautifully by one of our archaeologists, and it's very professional. It looks like a National Geographic type site. And that image is the magnetometer image that Dr. Chet Walker created. What we do as a standard methodology is we fly the site with a drone and create a photo mosaic of the area. And then we scan the ground, and you find an image like this. And he sent me this image and he said, look, guess where the B-17 is? And you can clearly see all 4 engines in the magnetometer image there, and you can see the center of the area where the cockpit was. So it shows you how, using remote sensing, you can save yourself a tremendous amount of time by
Sure.
pinpointing the location and digging right onto it.
And here's a shot of dog tags. Now, is that in Tarawa? Is that in Europe?
Yes, that's a U.S. Army Air Corps dog tag recovered with an individual who is an Army Air Corps air crewman who crashed after takeoff in a bomber from Tarawa after the battle. And he and the other members of his crew were buried in one of the Marine cemeteries on the environs of the cemetery.
Oh, wow. And how about
that is a stainless steel homemade dog tag by one of the individuals that are in that picture of 3 Marines that you showed at the beginning before they were recovered.
Oh, here?
Yes.
Wow. That's fascinating. And this is the Bible that you were talking about?
That's the pocket Bible and the Boy Scout knife found in the flight suit of one of the members of the air crew that Will worked on.
How did that thing survive after all that years, all the water?
There's an anoxic environment when the water table is higher than it is in other areas, and this place where the crash was a swamp in World War II, and the plane crashed into a swampy area, and in Europe, those places do an amazing amount of preservation.
Wow, just fascinating. Yeah, nicely done, sir. Nicely done. Well,
it wasn't me. I was just
what a nicely done project. You know what? It's got to make you feel good to see the tangible results of what you all
and
put forth.
it's all about the outcome, and so it was a perfect outcome.
And this is a incredible shot right here of a C-17. It looks like your crew's coming back with the remains of. How many did you have on that one?
In that, there were, I believe, 12 Marines that were flying home, and we were able to fly along with them on the way from Tarawa back to Hawaii. So that was a small honor for us. That was very nice.
And how about here?
This is the recovery ceremony at Hickam Air Force Base for 35 of the 52 Marines that we recovered in Cemetery 27 on Tarawa, and that was in 2015.
Jeez, it's just amazing to me. And so, what does the commandant say about this?
The commandant was thrilled. All of the active duty Marines that we've met and retired Marines that we've met as they relate to this project in Tarawa have been thrilled by the success of it.
Do you get a lot of retired Marines that volunteer, like to come out?
Not many, but we have an outstanding retired Marine who's the Chief Operating Officer of History Flight named Sergeant Major Justin Leahu, who is working as the tireless kind of leader at History Flight who's walking across America right now, raising awareness and raising funds to fund the mission. They started in June of this year in Boston, and they're walking the old Highway 20, and they've gotten all the way. They're almost at Eugene, Oregon now, so they're almost done.
Do me a favor and send me his phone number so I can text him.
Yeah.
My buddy, like I said, I've got a Marine there in Eugene that they probably love to host him or do something.
Yeah, he'd love to be on your program as well to do an interview. They're really good guys, and interestingly enough, I was flying over their area a couple of weeks ago, and I sent Justin a text, and I said, "Hey, I'm flying over your area right now. It looks like the snow is coming." And he sent me a picture of them in the snow with snow gear on, walking across America. And I said, "I'm going to be." He goes, "We're going to be in Boise tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I'm landing in Boise tomorrow at 4:23. You should come out and visit." And he did. He and the other two Marines came out and visited us in Boise, and it was kind of like a chance meeting, but it worked out really well.
They got some good IPA out there. So did you buy them a couple IPAs to get the carb level back up for the Sergeant Major?
I had to be wheels up in 40 minutes. So we chatted for a little while and then took off and flew east.
That's amazing. So what is your next project, you personally? What are you going to embark on?
Well, we have this project in Tarawa we have a 12-month-a-year contract with the Department of Defense working on that. And we estimate, if it's properly funded, that we'll be able to finish it in about 3 years. And then we seek to try to raise additional resources to reopen our office in Europe. And we have a stack of projects in Europe. I mean, you can look at my desk here.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
That's all projects, and that's pictures of some of the guys that we've recovered. But we're going to reopen our office in Europe, and we're also going to try to reopen our office in the Philippines, where we found several POW cemeteries in the Philippines of American POWs that we think would be very valuable recovery sites.
And what about families? What is your best memory of reunited a family with someone?
They're all equally important. Probably one of the most remarkable ones, we recovered 12 Marines from underneath our office building on Tarawa.
Wow.
The Cemetery 27 burial row went across a parking lot, and it was about 60 to 70 feet long. And the last 12 members of the Marine Corps were underneath this building. And I thought naively that we would have to tear the building down and raise, a couple $1 million to buy it. And our vice president at the time, who, when he got out of the Marine Corps after Vietnam, had been the city manager of the city of San Diego. And he said, "No need to do that. We can bring an engineer in and put braces underneath the foundation of the building and dig down through the floor." And so we did that.
Wow. And
that was incredible. And we recovered 12 Marines underneath the building. And one of them was First Lieutenant George Busa, who had been wounded on Guadalcanal, and then he was killed on Tarawa. And he had an infant daughter when he shipped out to go to the Battle of Tarawa. And when he was buried in Arlington, she was there with her children and her grandchildren.
Wow.
And they all bore his resemblance. So that was an incredible experience for us. But all of the experiences, the family experiences, have been equally valuable. And it just shows you that all these years later, there are still so many people that are living that are directly connected to these deceased people, no different than someone who died in Afghanistan a couple of years ago.
Right. You remind me so much of my buddy Zach Fike. We return lost medals that are discovered, Purple Hearts and whatnot, to the families. And Zach, off the top of his head, can just pull up story after story of an incredible find, how they discovered the medal, returned it to the family, and and having been on this journey, it is spiritual when you see connections and you see things that there's no way that they should have connected like this,
Oh,
that
right.
allowed this to happen. I mean, just one cog off the wheel, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we've seen so many things like that. So many of the families that we've worked with have told us about how the mother of the missing Marine felt that he had died right around Thanksgiving of 1943.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, they were right. I mean, it wasn't like some sort of premonition. I mean, they were feeling, the spirituality of losing their son. And we've seen that connection just throughout so many of these different cases. I think on the phone I told you about a man who called me and said he was named after James Bernard Johnson, and I texted you a photograph of James Bernard Johnson in his herringbone twill uniform. But his brother had named him after his brother. I mean, excuse me, his father had named him after his brother. And he said, well, what do you know about James Bernard Johnson? And I told him, and he said, well, I'd like to come and meet you sometime, and maybe we could talk some more about this. And I said, sure. I live in Big Pine Key, Florida. And there was a long pause, and he said, so do I. And I kind of went, are you kidding me? And he goes, I live in Doctor's Arm. And I said, I live in Long Beach Drive, come on over. And so
beer's in the fridge, come on over.
Yeah, and we became really good friends, and then we recovered his uncle 3 years later.
That's phenomenal.
His uncle was one of the 35 individuals in that photograph that you showed in the caskets at Hickam. And so, yeah, there's a huge connection like that. There's so much about this kind of thing that people are not really that cognizant of. But the more cognizant of it that you become, the more effective you can be in solving some of these old cases.
Yeah.
I can link that back to, bringing the boys. I mean, the connection to our next, the next generation. My kids have not joined the military, so they don't have that, like that connection that myself and my wife did. But just bringing them there and having them, work their tail off, put their phones down for a little while, and get to see, exactly what they're doing, putting their hands in it and seeing what they're doing. I know there was a connection made with my boys. Now one of them wants to still consider in the military. My oldest, I'm actually working with Mark on heading to Tarawa in a few months to hopefully spend a couple of days out there and work with my oldest, who didn't get the opportunity in Berlin. And so, I know there's a connection there, and he wants to actually join the military. He wants to be a Navy doctor. So he's really excited to be involved with this. I got some, James wrote something shortly after he went, and he said, my father and mother both flew fighter jets in the Navy, and it was important to me to know that we were bringing home loved ones, just as I would hope that someone would have looked after my family. So, I think as Mark, that gets me all toughed up. But, as Mark says, you're just connecting with so many generations and doing things for them that they never would have thought would have happened, and things that we as military members, I know, Taco, you and I, would appreciate that, hey, if something had happened to us or people that we had flown with or worked with, to know that you have people like Mark who are there to basically pick you up and bring you home. It's just an amazing thing.
I mean, look at the remains. The Navy was he F-18? Yeah, the F-18 guy that disappeared in Iraq.
Yeah,
and they brought his remains home after 30 years. It's we never forget. We can never forget about our fallen. And you're absolutely right. I would hope that somebody would bring my remains back, or whatever's left of me, to give some closure to the family. So when Wilbur texted me and said he was going over, Mark, I'm all excited. I'm getting on the computer and I'm looking at my calendar, and my wife is over my shoulder and she goes, no, you don't. That is my parents' 50th anniversary. Remember, on the 18th. And I'm like, yeah, yes. Oh, I love my in-laws. I do. I absolutely love my in-laws. So I have to do that. But I am going to make, my son's a freshman in high school, and I'm going to make every effort. And my daughter, who's a sophomore at A&M, Texas A&M, forever she wanted to be a forensic anthropologist. She used to watch that show Bones and was religious about it, and then went from that to be an FBI agent. So maybe I can convince her to join me on a journey and go do something good and return something for somebody who laid their life down for our country.
I
That's the
think
whole.
I think a trip like this will either make or break you for being archaeologist or forensic scientist, because it is a lot of hard work. My kids have decided that's probably not the direction they're going to go. They appreciate they did it, but it was a lot of work. And the people that work for Mark and those crews, those teams are amazing. I mean, what they do for these lost aviators and lost soldiers and Marines is just amazing. So they work their tails off.
Well, Mark, what do you have to pack up and if I go over on my own, what specialty stuff do I need, or do I show up and you guys actually have the tools that okay, here, take this, and here's the lesson?
Well, typically each place where you would go would have a different set of requirements, and if someone volunteered with us, you'd be more than welcome, and we'd supply you with the knowledge that you need to get the correct set of requirements. But all the equipment has already been front loaded on the mission, so all of the actual working stuff is already pre-positioned. Typically, Europe, you just need work clothes and something to keep you cool in the sun. In the Pacific, you need something to keep you cool in the sun, as well as all sorts of inoculations that you might need for specific types of tropical sicknesses, bug spray, all that kind of thing.
Malaria.
Yeah, but we
Yeah.
have a support team of people, and we have a list. Like, here's what you need to be prepared for in this setting, and here's what you do in another setting.
I probably still have some of my inoculations are still good in me. I mean,
Oh, I'm sure.
I have a cocktail of a bevy of cocktails that the Uncle Sugar has provided over the years, but I'm sure I have
Right.
to get knocked up. I put down there historyflight.com, and that's your website. In
Yes,
the
sir.
information description of the show, it'll have a link to your website. I encourage everybody to go there. You can look at it. It talks about the teams, the projects, the news. If you'd like to join and volunteer, the partners, the MIAs from Tarawa, Philippines, Europe that they have brought back and identified. So there's lots of great information down there on historyflight.com. Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thank
Will,
you.
this has been great, you two. I'm envious as hell. It gets my juices going just thinking about getting over there and doing positive stuff and recovering these guys and bringing them home. That is phenomenal. So, gents, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will definitely contact Randy Stillinger, who is
Okay,
our
great.
American Airlines Veterans Initiatives. He gets a million emails, so I got to catch him at the right time and get you two connected, and
That'd be
then
great. We'd appreciate it.
rebuild that relationship.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah, you bet. Mark, have a great one. Will, have a good one. Tell the boys I said hey, and I'll definitely catch up with you soon. I'm going to drop you off. Hold on 1 second, all right? I'll be right back. Hey, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. This, to me, is near and dear to my heart. What they're doing and behind the scenes work to bring these remains home is so important as a nation, for our survivors. And they're doing the same thing in Vietnam. They're recovering remains. There are different organizations. I'm a World War II fanatic, so this is more near and dear to my heart, having been over on Iwo Jima during the 50th, and we recovered Japanese remains. And there are just instances all over the world where there are grave sites that need to be reclaimed and the remains brought home for the families. So if you have a chance, go look up historyflight.com. Check them out. If you can support them, I know that they could use the money. If you are willing to raise your right hand, volunteer, pay your own way, jump on an airplane, go over to Europe for a week, I guarantee you they would love to have your help. And if my daughter is watching, yes, I want you to come with Dad, and we're going to go do some history, digging in history, okay? Anyway, you guys take care. Adios, hasta luego, sa wiedersehen, tschüss, sheshini. Au revoir, domo arigatou gozaimasu, tano shinde kudasai, ciao, arrivederci, tashikor, assalamu alaikum, malaha, do widzenia. You guys have a good one. See you now.